Plants and fungi are sources of ancient knowledge, spiritual nourishment, and bodily sustenance. As primordial vestiges, natural forms are blueprints and points of genesis. This episode unravels the thought process behind the newest issue on object lesson space. How can a deeply rooted perspective resituate our understandings of these environments and cosmologies? Hello and welcome to another episode of Mushroomed, a podcast hosted by the Singapore-based online platform Object Lesson Space. My name is Joella. I'm the founding editor of the platform and your host for this podcast. In this episode, we're going to be introducing you to our newest issue on Object Lesson Space. We publish new articles on our platform once every 2 months, and this episode gives you the lowdown as to the thought processes behind each issue and how everything comes together. Our latest issue on Object Lesson Space is titled On Old Growth. Old growth forests are also known as primary forests, and they are both incredibly important and deeply significant. These are historical places that have seen cycle after cycle of birth and decay. This issue features a total of 5 artists whose works and practices have touched on notions of plant sentience, organicity, and indigenous botanical knowledge, and is now available online at www.objectlessons.space. In paying homage to the transition and transformation exemplified by old growth habitats, this episode will attempt to speak to the enduring concert between human and non-human beings. You'll hear from myself and from the artists we interviewed for this issue. On Kusu Island, off the coast of mainland Singapore, sits an old and large banyan tree. Every year, pilgrims travel to Kusu Island to pay their respects at 3 keramat, or shrines, and the Taoist temple there. It is a religiously syncretic site, and pilgrims who make the trip are of various faiths and beliefs. Where a keramat may be found, a large towering tree such as a banyan tree can often be found in its immediate vicinity. In the case of Kusu Island, a banyan tree lends its cool shade and assured presence to the shrine complex. The branches of the banyan tree are filled with strips of cloth, each containing a devoted pilgrim's prayers, hopes, and wishes. One of the artists we interviewed for our latest issue on Object Lesson Space is Lena Bui, and she sheds more light on how old, large trees can serve as a focal point for social life and the wider community in the context of Saigon. Lena lives and works in Saigon, Vietnam. Her practice is wide-ranging, and some of her works articulate the impact of rapid development on our relationship with nature. At the center of a recent project of hers is a large African mahogany tree in Saigon that was felled recently.
So this major road, one of the oldest in Saigon, like right in the center. So I grew up here, and then it's probably the most planted old road, like with rows of trees, like 200 something trees on just one road. And then they decided to chop everything down, and they did it so quickly that a lot of people also didn't realize what was going on. And so going past this street, this road, a rather big street, and seeing this happening, I was also just completely shocked. And then also I was thinking about a very common belief here that we think spirits reside in trees, especially like hungry ghosts with no place to go. They live in the tree, and it's just so. Some types of trees here, you will always see altars placed underneath, and this is just everywhere. And it's a form of belief that's a mixture of Taoism and Buddhism and I don't know, local concoction of. So it's not organized really, but and I love that it's sort of living, it's not so much orchestrated, but it's like the spirits are there, that people still believe in them.
African mahogany trees are not indigenous to Vietnam and are actually native to West Africa. Yet they have become commonplace in various cities around Southeast Asia. And if you look up the African mahogany tree on Wikipedia today, the main cover image is of a tree-lined avenue in Hanoi. Yet, in rapidly developing cities all around the world, trees such as these are often cut down to make way for roads, highways, and buildings. Beyond their cultural significance, Lena also spent time talking about how trees provide much needed and well appreciated shade for a host of other activities.
In that road, actually, the pavements were very big, so there's a vibrant life on the side of the road. There are like barber shops, just some people with mirrors, but they've been doing it 30 years on the street at the same spot or something. And I did, when they chopped down the trees, I did like rubbings, physical rubbings of the stump. For like 1 month, every day I was on the street, and lots of people stopped by and chat, and locals also come out. So, it's beyond also the belief, the mythical aspect, but I think there's also a lot of social life.
Trees have captivated the imagination of various artists, and Lena is not alone in her explorations about them. We'll soon be hearing from another artist who shares these interests. Jason Lim's repertoire of works encompass ceramics, photography, installations, and performance art. He is also one of the artists we've interviewed for our latest issue on old growth.
Before looking at banyan tree, I spent a lot of time walking in the back streets of in the city, and before that, I kind of just usually very amazed by this plant that just cling on to the cracks of the wall. They are just growing from there, or they need so little soil, and this kind of plant will just grow and takes over the walls or even the architecture sometimes. And I got interested to find out what this kind of plants is, and I've discovered that they are actually from the ficus species. Basically, it's a fig trees, but there are many different species to it. And then upon further research, I realized that the banyan tree is actually a specimen of the fig trees, and therefore I kind of used the banyan as the main motif for this clay installation work that I've been doing in the last few years. What's interesting for me about the ficus is that it's a very resilient plant, and it's also quite a parasitic. It has a very parasitic characteristic to it, because it cling on to something else and later on it just takes over the host. There's a kind of banyan called a strangling ficus. They kind of cling on to a host tree, and then they'll just totally strangle the host, and at the end there'll be like a hollow in the middle of the banyan tree structure, which is formerly occupied by the host tree. So for me, this is it shows a lot about humanity in some sense. The resilience of the humanity, but also at the same time, I feel that humanity is also quite parasitic. That we are kind of relying on each other for that kind of survival instinct.
Trees such as the banyan exist in communion with a host of other living beings, and we now move from the highest point of a natural habitat to look at what happens deep underground. There is so much more to forests and natural habitats than what is visible. It turns out that what was happening beneath the surface would redefine the way we understood these places. It was always very much doubted that trees in a forest could talk to or communicate with one another. That is until Suzanne Simard and her research turned these misconceptions on its head. Simard's research into forest ecologies was revolutionary. Her research showed how trees would share knowledge with one another. We just didn't understand their language yet. How trees pulled this off was through interspecies collaboration. When fungal webs and mycelial networks pair up with tree roots, mycorrhizal networks are formed. Through these mycorrhizal networks, trees share carbon, nutrients, water, hormones, and warnings with one another. Simard's research is proof of the fact that forests are more than just a collection of trees. They've also shown that trees and the fruiting bodies above ground are just the tip of the iceberg. We cannot come to a full cohesive picture of what happens within forest networks without a discussion of fungi. Shaiful Garibaldi is an artist whose practice is interested in fungi, moss, and lichen. Shaiful lives and works in Bandung, and being in the city has invigorated his enduring interest in nature and mycology.
For the research or the observation, so the city of Bandung is like a place where it becomes your lab or your outdoor labs. Bandung is very interesting. I think it's like a topologically the city is under the Bandung Basin. It's like the large basin bowl, which on the top is like surrounded by the mountains. So environmentally it's like the city filled with the various prone to the natural disaster. So it's just like we have like the water problems, and then the trapped air pollution, and also the volcanoes. So I think the experience of living and exploring the city and surrounding eventually shaped me my interest in the nature. As in the case of in the mycology, like you said before. So when I know there is the rainy season or like 3 days in the the Bandung, so I know it's the time for me to going to up to the mountain to looking for the the spot for the fungus or for the mushroom. It's easily for me to to observe from my place to just like 1 hour, 2 hours going inside, going in the forest, just like make a loss in the forest looking for the mushroom things and something like that.
There's a wonderfully interconnected or ecological perspective to the way Shaiful thinks about and moves through his city. He mentions foraging for mushrooms during the rainy season, and these explorations have made their way into his own works as well. Shaiful's works often bring organic materials such as moss, orchids, and mycelium into the context of the art gallery.
Working with them is always make me, give me a surprise, like you said before. So it's like a weekend plan of the final result of the works, but then because they are the creatures that move, they grow, they're very sensitive, and then we get the unexpected results. So at the first, it's feeling, so I'm feeling become very failed, when they are not working or they are not growth according to the schedule or as it should be. But then it's give me the feeling of the acceptance, because you cannot fully control them, of course, because you're working with the living organism, and this thing, like the acceptance, the awareness about this, and then also build my character in my not just in with the mushroom things, but also my work with the conventional things like my painting.
Incorporating fungi and lichen into artworks might seem unconventional, but organic materials come in many forms. A material that many of us will find more familiar is clay. Clay is drawn from the earth, and as a result of that, often bears characteristics of the land they come from, such as soil composition or mineral levels. Working with clay is something that artist Madhvi Subramanian is familiar with. As a ceramic artist based in Singapore, clay is at the heart of Madhvi's practice. She shares a deep affinity with clay that she tells us about in our interview with her.
I think clay is one of the most versatile materials we have on this planet. It like you said, it's very organic. It has a malleability about it, and it is responsive. And for clay artists, people who are working with clay, it's not so much a belief, but we can see it. It's evident in its structure that it has a memory. It has a memory, and it also responds back to you. So you actually do develop a dialogue with this material as you keep working with it. And it's so when I say memory, I'm honestly meaning a memory where you lay a flat slab of clay and you twist it in a certain way, and then you flatten it back, and you go away, and you come back and you see that slight twist has come back into the material because it remembers what had happened to it. So I just love these subtle aspects about clay that constantly reminds me that it's a material that's very alive. It's not just sensuous and sexy and wonderful to work with, but it's responsive. And again, as clay artists, we'll say if you push clay too far, it's going to push right back. So you cannot really put your will, force yourself onto it as much. You have to work with it. And these are some of the things that, as I started working with clay and started learning about this, conceptually, spiritually, it connects me more and more with this material.
This memory of natural materials, of things that are off the ground, is an important point. Being attuned to and in concert with our natural surroundings brings the artist Ana Mendieta's practice to mind. Ana Mendieta was an artist who worked across painting, sculpture, video, and performance. Her works were dazzling and often ritualistic, and she called them earth or body sculptures. Mendieta is perhaps best known for her Silhouette series. In this series of works, Mendieta traced the outline or the silhouette of her body out with a variety of organic materials. Some of the materials included rocks, flowers, branches, leaves, gunpowder, and blood. About this series, she wrote, and I quote, "I have been carrying out a dialogue between the landscape and the female body. I believe this has been a direct result of my having been torn from my homeland during my adolescence. I am overwhelmed by the feeling of having been cast from the womb. My art is the way I re-establish the bonds that unite me to the universe. It is a return to the maternal source." End quote. Mendieta moved from Cuba to the United States of America at a young age, and although the idea of place looms large in this series of works, the artist also touched on notions of feminism, spirituality, identity, and more. Mendieta's works are hard to place, and that in-betweenness is front and center within this series, which contains more than 200 works. Her ability to sit with and within nature was the focal point of an essay by writer Rebecca Tomas. In this essay, Tomas writes about how Mendieta speaks the unspeakable, not by making it known, but by allowing it to speak through her. And I quote, "Her art shows us that the natural world does not wait outside of us, but moves through the doors of our being, connecting and reforming what we are. its sticky difference impossible to excise. Her work is the promise of a green flourishing, another way of sharing with, becoming with, the world of which we are a part." End quote. Although it seems counterintuitive, it is this imprecision that allows for a truthful telling and retelling. This communion with non-human entities and beings is something that artist Zai Tang explores in his work as well. Zai is known for his evocative works that sit at the intersections of sound, installation, animation, projection, and performance. During my interview with him, we spent some time speaking to the way in which the human is disproportionately centered through terms such as the Anthropocene, and how art might gesture at possible alternatives to that.
Of course, in thinking about what nature means, and how we understand this point in time, the term Anthropocene is important in understanding a sort of geological kind of situation of understanding this moment of mass extinction. But perhaps it falls short of where do we understand the source of the problem being. So whilst I do think the onus is on us to understand and find means to tackle this kind of ecological crisis, I think it might also focus on the human aspect a bit too much, whereas a term like Capitalocene becomes very useful because in the writings of Jason Moore and Raj Patel, they speak about how really it's not because of humans that we've arrived at this situation. It's because of capitalism. Capitalism, of course, has shaped nature as a process of capital accumulation. It's completely transformed the world, and it's also divided up the world as well. So in order to find a path towards a more cohesive and equal future, I think we need to find strategies to disrupt, maybe even within ourselves, the kind of capitalist mindset, which simply cannot sustain itself on this finite planet with its finite resources. So considering listening in relation to this time, as I tried to articulate before, I think it's really a gesture towards an other. In this case of my work, at least, it's a gesture towards this other of other than human creatures that we share this world with. And listening, I feel like it's a kind of possibility space of both connection and imagination too. And it's for me, it's kind of a gentler gesture towards something that maybe can open up certain possibilities towards creating more cohesive ecological realities.
Old-growth forests are rich, biodiverse habitats. Although this episode was not a direct discussion around forest ecologies, it was so clear to us that the complexity of these multi-layered spaces have seeped into the works and practices of contemporary artists today as frameworks, analogies, and points of reference. It is also important to note that all of the ideas this episode touches on have been known for a long time to indigenous communities around the world. This ancient wisdom is passed down from generation to generation, and we would do well to heed that knowledge when it comes to ecological stewardship and environmental restoration. If you enjoyed this deep dive into our latest issue, the full articles and the transcript of this episode can be found on our website at www.objectlessons.space. We also have a presence on all the usual social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you like our work, we do have a Patreon page that you can check out as well. Mushroomed is a podcast series hosted by Object Lessons Space and produced in collaboration with the wonderful people at Singapore Community Radio. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.